After months of heated debate, imposed deadlines and internal divisions, this week was meant to be all about the emissions trading scheme. But then a succession of boats sailed over the horizon. To discuss this week in politics, I'm joined in Sydney by Jason Clare, Parliamentary Secretary for Employment, and in Brisbane by Peter Dutton, Shadow Health Spokesman. Welcome to both of you.
Good evening, Lee.
Thank you.
I'll come to those issues in a moment, but let's begin elsewhere. We just saw the Brandon Nelson testimonial dinner, which was held in Sydney tonight. It comes in a week when the polls show that on primary vote, the coalition has slipped to a historic low of 30%. Peter Dutton, how is it that 2 years after the last election and two opposition leaders later, the coalition has effectively made no inroads against Kevin Rudd?
Well, Lee, this is a government which is a very well-oiled machine. They have media spin like we've never seen in this country before. They dominate each of the media cycles. They have people trawling through the galleries each morning, peddling stories, trying to work out exactly what's going to happen in the media cycle. So the opposition's up against a very slick machine, very similar but much more professional even than we saw with Bob Carr in New South Wales or Peter Beattie in Queensland. So after a long period in government, obviously it's difficult for the Liberal Party, I might say, more so than the Labor Party, because we're much more reliant on a strong leader in government, and coming into opposition is always a difficult period.
So when would you expect to be able to turn that around? As I said, it's been 2 years.
Well, look, my judgment is that people are fascinated with Kevin Rudd at the moment, and in many ways, in my mind, it is a house of cards. If you talk to some of the Labor backbenchers, frankly even some of the Labor frontbenchers, and certainly people in the gallery, they think the Prime Minister is a very different person than the persona publicly that people are swallowing at the moment. So when people scratch the surface, when the Prime Minister has a few testy issues and he's perhaps on the page with one of those issues at the moment, then I think we'll start to see a different side to Kevin Rudd, and I think that's when we'll start to see a turnaround in the numbers.
Jason Clare, Julia Gillard warned the Labor Party room this week not to be complacent given the Liberals' continuing woes. Isn't there a real risk that members will get cocky when you're so far ahead?
Oh, I think you've always got to assume that every election is going to be very, very difficult and very tough. The Liberal Party are in trouble at the moment because they're divided on almost every issue that we talk about in Parliament. They're divided on the ETS. A lot of people don't even think climate change exists. They're divided on the sale of Telstra. You've got people like Barnaby Joyce who think that that is a good thing, and there are other people who think that it's a bad thing in the Liberal Party. And they're also divided on asylum seekers. You've got some people who want to bring back the Pacific solution and other people who want to bring back temporary protection visas, and others who realise that that was bad policy. We've got to be focused on governing, and what we've done is acted decisively. If we didn't do what this government has done, Australia would be in recession right now and thousands more people would have lost their job.
But in terms of this cockiness, let's take the Higgins by-election, which will be coming up soon. Labor's announced it won't be fielding a candidate there. It's the same decision regarding the Bradfield by-election. What is that if not arrogance?
No, it's a recognition that winning a seat like that is always going to be extremely difficult. In the 60 years that the seat of Higgins has been around, Labor has never won that seat, never come close.
But who do you expect the tens of thousands of Labor voters to vote for?
Well, I think I need to make this point, and that is that there's only about 12 months or so before we have a general election, and the party's made the decision that we need to conserve resources. There'll be a general election coming up, and we'll fight that fight then. But
wouldn't it be a useful barometer to test the polls and see if those numbers that we're seeing are borne out in the field? And you could do that, say, somewhere like Higgins. Yeah. Probably 2 or 3% might account for Peter Costello's personal popularity, so then it becomes a seat that you'd have a chance of making a decent showing in.
By-elections aren't designed for testing public opinion or testing polls. They're very expensive. It's going to cost a lot of money to run. This is a seat where in some of the boos at the last election, Peter Costello had 3 Liberal voters for every Labor voter. It's rolled gold Liberal Party territory, and we've made the decision, and I think it's quite a right one, with an election only about 12 months away, conserve resources, get ready for what's going to be a very tough general election.
Peter Dutton, in recent weeks we've been hearing a lot about your personal political woes. Labor's been letterboxing Dixon voters with a pamphlet reading "Dutton dumped Dixon." Haven't you made an already difficult task in winning that seat impossible for yourself by giving Labor so much ammunition?
No, Lee, if you cast your mind back to the 2001 election, and we saw it in 04 and 07 as well, the Labor Party's always run a negative campaign in Dixon. My Labor opponent in Dixon at the moment is following in the footsteps of Cheryl Curnow, and if that's her decision, if she wants to behave like Cheryl Curnow did in 2001 and the Labor Party think that they can gain some sort of mileage from that sort of performance, well, that's a decision for them. I'm going to be campaigning positively because I believe that I've got a good track record in my electorate, a lot of achievements locally. I've got runs on the board, and this election upcoming in 12 months, as Jason says, or thereabouts, in Dixon will be about who has the most experience and who has the most significant voice to be heard in Canberra. That's what the people of Dixon want, and I believe that on that basis I have a better offering than the Labor candidate.
But how are you going to persuade those voters that you're not someone who just dumps them when a better political opportunity comes along?
Well, I'm going to say look at my track record in relation to the last 8 years of what I've been able to achieve for our local area. I can't rely on that. I've got to say this is our plan for the future as well. And I've got a long-standing association with my electorate that goes back many generations. And the difficulty at the moment, of course, with the great growth in Queensland is that there is redistribution after redistribution, and with the stroke of a pen, all of those years of hard work and building up a relationship with my electorate was wiped out, and the seat was turned into a notionally Labor seat. That was a decision of the Electoral Commission, and like many of my constituents, I was angry about that. But now it's time for us to focus on who is going to be the best candidate at the next election. And if the Labor Party want to run a similar campaign to that which Cheryl Curnow ran in 2001, well, I think they'll suffer the consequences. But we should be about putting forward a positive campaign, and I hope that at some stage the Labor Party is able to do that in Dixon, but certainly over the course of the last 3 elections they've not had any track record of doing so.
Let me bring in Jason Clare. Is it a Cheryl Curnow-style campaign that Labor's running? I
suspect the Labor Party will tell the truth. The fact is that Peter left his electorate. He wanted to go somewhere else for a safer seat. If John Howard... I feel sorry for Peter a little bit here, because if John Howard was the leader, then he would have got his way and Peter would have been put in that seat. Peter is a smart bloke and he's considered the great white hope of the Liberal Party. If you had a strong leader, somebody like John Howard, then they would have made sure that Peter was given that seat. But Malcolm Turnbull, because of his weakness and because of the divisions that are still existing in the Liberal Party, couldn't get his way. So Peter's got to come back with his tail between his legs and try and convince people that he walked away from, that he really cares about them. Now, that's a really tough ask. I think he's got a lot of trouble in front of him.
All right, let's turn to the issue that's dominated the news this week, asylum seekers. Jason Clare, given how far Kevin Rudd is ahead in the polls, as I said earlier, could he not afford to expend some political capital by speaking in a more measured fashion regarding asylum seekers rather than creating a competition about who's the toughest?
Well, that's exactly what the government's doing by saying that you need to act tough and decisively, but you also need a fair and humane approach.
But isn't words like hardline and illegal immigrants creating this build-up of rhetoric that encourages an atmosphere where it's a competition about who's the toughest?
What the Prime Minister was saying is that where people are seeking asylum, they're in Australian waters, then they're processed in the normal way. If they're found to be refugees, then they come to Australia. If they're not, they're found to be illegal, then they're returned to their home, and that's the appropriate thing. But the important point to make here is that this is a complex and a difficult matter. There have been boats coming to Australia for the last 20 years. It'll be a problem in the future for governments of different political persuasions. And anyone that says that domestic policies, returning temporary protection visas or the Pacific solution, any changes to domestic regulations is going to solve this problem is kidding themselves. You need to work with your next door neighbour, you need to work with Indonesia, and you need to work where the source of the problem is, which is Sri Lanka at the moment. Now, Sri Lanka's just finished a civil war. We've seen the end of a civil war. It bears a lot of similarity to what happened in Vietnam. 1975, the fall of Saigon, and you had people in boats that were coming to Australia. Now, no one blamed Malcolm Fraser for that. No one said that the Fraser government was responsible for that. The way you need to act in this situation is in a mature and responsible way, but most importantly, you need to work with your neighbours, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and work where the problem is at its core with Sri Lanka.
Well, Peter Dutton, are you, as Jason Clare says, kidding yourselves that changes in domestic